Sagittarius is getting ready to leave a place. The reason is being revealed. It's their destiny. Sagittarius, have you felt it lately? The quiet restlessness beneath your skin. The sense that the walls you once called home have grown too small for the vastness of your spirit? You've been holding on, convincing yourself that stability means safety, yet deep down you know you were never meant to remain confined. You are the wanderer of the zodiac, the seeker whose soul thrives only when it is free to expand, and now the universe is whispering. It is time to move. This leaving is not an escape. It is a return to who you were always meant to be. I know it can feel bittersweet, as if you are walking away from a chapter that still holds pieces of your heart. But the truth is, Sagittarius, you cannot shrink yourself to fit where you no longer belong. What once felt nourishing may now feel heavy, and that heaviness is not failure. It is your soul's way of signaling that your next horizon is calling. So breathe. Lean into this message as if it was written just for you. Together we will uncover why the road ahead is opening, why destiny has aligned at this very moment, and why your courage to leave will become your greatest gift. If this message resonates with you, I invite you to stay with me to like, share, and subscribe, not as an obligation but as a way of affirming. I am ready for the journey that is mine. Gate 1: The Silent Cracks. Sagittarius, every great departure begins not with a sudden storm but with the quietest fractures, the subtle cracks in the life you have been carrying on your shoulders. You may not even remember when they first appeared. Perhaps it was the day you woke up and realized your laughter felt a little more forced, or the evening when you sat among people you once cherished and felt a strange distance you could not explain. Those are the cracks, the whispers of your soul reminding you that you are no longer aligned with the space you inhabit. For Sagittarius, ruled by Jupiter, expansion is not a luxury. It is a necessity. You are the archer, and your spirit is the bow pulled by forces larger than yourself, aching to release an arrow into a horizon yet unseen. The cracks come when you ignore that pull, when you try to stay in places that no longer match your frequency. I once spoke with a woman named Lisa, a Sagittarius who had spent nearly 20 years in a stable corporate job. On the outside, she was the picture of success. Financial security, a respectable title, a house she had worked tirelessly to maintain. Yet every morning she sat in her car before walking into the office, hands gripping the steering wheel, fighting tears she couldn't justify. There's nothing wrong, she would tell herself. So why do I feel like I'm suffocating? That suffocation was not weakness. It was the soul's signal that her time in that space had expired. The crack had been forming for years, small signs she had ignored, moments when her creativity felt stifled, when her ideas were dismissed, when her spirit longed for a freedom her office walls could not provide. She had mistaken endurance for loyalty, but the truth was, her soul was calling her to something more. Sagittarius, perhaps you too have endured in silence, convincing yourself that gratitude means never questioning where you are. But there is a difference between being grateful and being imprisoned by comfort. The universe does not expand through stagnation, and neither do you. Every time you bite your tongue instead of speaking your truth, every time you convince yourself to stay when your heart whispers to go, you add another crack to the foundation of your spirit. These cracks are not your downfall. They are your awakening. Think of the relationships you have carried beyond their natural season. There was once warmth, joy, a sense of belonging, but now the conversations feel rehearsed, the connections stretch thin. You smile because it's easier than admitting the truth. You have outgrown the version of yourself that belonged there. Or consider the home that once felt safe, but now the rooms echo with emptiness. Not because anyone did anything wrong, but because your energy has shifted. These are not failures, Sagittarius. They are signs. They are the universe's way of telling you that your arrow cannot remain in the bow forever. A man named David, another Sagittarius, told me of his marriage that lasted 3 decades. He stayed not because he was in love, but because he believed leaving would destroy the stability his children depended on. But as the years passed, he realized that staying had not saved anyone. It had only drained the light from his own eyes. The cracks showed up as insomnia, unexplained anxiety, and finally a moment when he looked in the mirror and did not recognize the man staring back. His soul had been whispering all along, "You are not meant to stay here." The courage to leave came not from selfishness, but from finally listening to what those cracks were saying. Sagittarius, you more than any other sign know the power of truth. And yet, the hardest truth to face is the one within your own heart. The cracks are there. They show up when you wake up and no longer feel inspired. They show up when you sit in silence and realize the joy you once had has dissolved into obligation. They show up when you notice your body feels heavier, your laughter rarer, your dreams pushed aside to make space for responsibilities that no longer belong to you. Do not ignore them. They are not signs that you are failing. They are signs that you are transforming. Imagine a bird who has outgrown its cage. At first, the cage felt safe, even protective. But as its wings grew stronger, the bars became too tight, the space too small. The bird could no longer pretend that safety was worth more than freedom. Sagittarius, you are that bird. The cage you are in may not be visible. It could be a career, a relationship, a belief system. But the cracks you feel are the rust on those bars, proof that they are no longer strong enough to contain you. And that is not a tragedy. It is a miracle waiting to unfold. You were born under a sign that cannot settle for half-truths. When the cracks appear, they do not come to destroy you, but to reveal the places where light can finally enter. This is why you cannot ignore them, why no matter how hard you try to stay, your soul will continue to remind you that expansion is your birthright. Sagittarius, if you are listening now and feel a lump in your throat, tears you cannot quite explain, that is the confirmation. The cracks are real. They are not here to break you but to set you free. And so gate 1 is this, the recognition of the silent cracks in your life. They are the evidence that your time in this place is ending, that the season has served its purpose, and that clinging to it will only deepen the fracture. Let them be what they are. A sign that your destiny is already waiting beyond the walls you have outgrown. Gate the awakening. Sagittarius, after the cracks come the awakening. It rarely arrives with fanfare or fireworks. Instead, it is often born in silence. In the quietest hours of the night when you are lying awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling a weight you can no longer name. Awakening is not a single moment. It is a series of small realizations that begin to break the illusion you have wrapped around yourself. It is that first breath where you admit, I cannot keep living this way. It is the instant you recognize that staying has cost you more than leaving ever will. For many Sagittarians, awakening feels like betrayal at first, betrayal of the promises you made, the identity you built, the people who rely on you. But the truth is, it is not betrayal at all. It is the most profound act of honesty you will ever commit to yourself. Awakening does not mean you stop loving those you once cared for. It means you finally include yourself in the circle of your own compassion. Take Maria, a Sagittarius artist I once worked with. She had spent years creating paintings in the corners of her home, but never dared to show them to the world. Instead, she worked in her family's business, convincing herself that security was more important than expression. But one night after finishing a long day at the shop, she walked past her own canvas covered in dust and suddenly burst into tears. I realized I had betrayed the part of me that was most alive, she said. That moment of breaking was not weakness. It was awakening. She had heard the voice of her soul louder than all the noise around her. You were born to create, not to shrink. For Sagittarius, ruled by Jupiter, awakening is tied to vision. You are always seeking, always scanning the horizon for what lies beyond. But when you remain in places that no longer fit, your vision narrows until you cannot even see yourself. Awakening is when that vision reopens, when you realize there is more than this, when you understand that your life is not meant to be a repetition of yesterday's compromises. Sometimes awakening arrives through loss. David, the man I mentioned earlier, only recognized his truth when his youngest child left for college. The home he had stayed in for decades suddenly echoed with silence, and for the first time, he faced himself without distraction. He told me, I realized I had been living for everyone but me. And in that silence I heard the question I had been avoiding. What do I want now? That was his awakening, not born from external permission but from the undeniable pull of his own soul. Sagittarius, your awakening may not look dramatic. It may be as simple as sitting in your car before work and admitting that the thought of another day drains the light from your body. It may be as subtle as noticing that the conversations with a partner no longer nourish you, that you feel more alone beside them than you do in solitude. It may be the quiet conviction that life is meant to be more than endurance. The specifics do not matter. What matters is that you stop silencing the truth when it arises. You may feel guilt. You may wonder if you are selfish for wanting more. But ask yourself this. Is it selfish to choose life over numbness? Is it selfish to seek joy after years of sacrifice? Is it selfish to honor the soul you were given? Sagittarius, the answer is no. Awakening is not selfishness. It is sacred responsibility. When you awaken, you are not abandoning others. You are teaching them, often without words, that it is possible to live authentically. You are showing them that love without truth is not love at all, it is performance. Think of the archer again, bow in hand. For years you may have kept the arrow drawn, trembling with the tension of holding everything together. Awakening is the moment you realize that the bow was never meant to stay locked in place. It was always meant to release. And that release does not destroy you. It propels you forward. But awakening is not always gentle. At first, it can feel like everything familiar is dissolving. You may cry more easily. You may feel restless, unable to explain why. You may even long for the comfort of the old life even as you know it no longer fits. This is normal. It is the shedding of a skin, the unraveling of a chapter that has reached its natural end. If you feel that tension now, do not mistake it for failure. It is the price of becoming awake. Let me tell you about Susan, another Sagittarius soul. She had spent years in a marriage that looked stable from the outside. She told herself it was enough, that security mattered more than passion. But one evening as she was washing dishes, she caught her reflection in the window. She saw a woman she barely recognized, tired eyes, dimmed light, a smile that no longer reached her soul. In that instant something shifted. She whispered, "I cannot do this anymore." That sentence became her awakening. She didn't leave that night, but from then on every choice began to align with that truth. Within a year she had stepped out of the marriage, and though the path was not easy, she said, "I finally feel like I'm breathing for the first time in decades." Sagittarius, awakening does not demand you act immediately. It only demands that you stop lying to yourself. The rest will follow in time. The cracks reveal the truth. The awakening gives you the courage to name it. And once named, it cannot be unseen. So if you find yourself restless, unable to ignore the call inside your chest, understand this. You are not broken. You are awakening. The very discomfort you feel is proof that you are alive, that your soul refuses to be silenced any longer. This awakening is not punishment, it is preparation. Preparation for the destiny that is waiting for you beyond the threshold of your current life. Do not run from it, Sagittarius. Do not numb it with distractions or bury it under obligations. Sit with it. Listen to it. Let it whisper what you have been too afraid to admit. You are meant for more than this. And that, Sagittarius, is the gift of Gate 2. The awakening is the moment your truth becomes louder than your fear. It is the sacred threshold where the life you have endured begins to give way to the life you are destined to live. Gate 3, the call of destiny. Sagittarius, once the awakening has stirred within you, life begins to whisper more insistently. It is no longer just restlessness or quiet discontent. It becomes a call so profound that you can no longer deny it. This is the call of destiny, the moment when your inner compass turns toward a direction you may not fully understand, but you know in your heart it is the way forward. It is as if the universe itself has conspired to guide you out of the familiar into the unknown. For some, this call arrives as an opportunity. For others, it comes as an ending. Either way, it carries the same message. You cannot remain where you are. Think of Lisa, a Sagittarius entrepreneur who had built a successful business that supported her family. Everyone admired her stability, her achievements, but inside she felt hollow. Then, out of nowhere, she was offered a position abroad, a role that would demand she leave everything she knew behind. "At first I resisted," she confessed. "I thought, how can I abandon what I've built? How can I leave the people who rely on me?" But the more she resisted, the louder the call became. She began noticing signs everywhere. Conversations about travel, dreams of wide-open skies, a persistent feeling that life was waiting for her somewhere else. Finally, she admitted, it wasn't just a job offer. It was destiny knocking. She went, and though the transition was painful, she discovered a life that matched her soul's hunger for expansion. Sagittarius, you are ruled by Jupiter, the planet of growth and higher purpose. That means you are never meant to live half a life. When destiny calls, it demands expansion of your environment, your beliefs, your sense of self. Sometimes the call feels exhilarating, filled with promise. Other times it feels terrifying, pulling you away from everything you thought was secure. But one thing is always true. The call is never wrong. Comes precisely when you are ready, even if you don't believe you are. David, whom I mentioned earlier, felt his call in the silence of an empty nest. For months he resisted, clinging to routine. But then a friend invited him to join a volunteer program overseas, teaching children in need. I laughed at first, he said. Me, uproot everything and go across the world at 50? Impossible. Yet the idea kept circling back, visiting him in his dreams, tugging at his thoughts during the day. Finally he surrendered. The first step was terrifying, but once he arrived he told me, I finally understood. Destiny wasn't about what I achieved. It was about who I became when I answered the call. The call of destiny often comes disguised as disruption. Perhaps your job ends unexpectedly, or a relationship dissolves, or you find yourself unable to continue in a role that once defined you. At first, you may feel abandoned by life. You may even wonder if you are being punished. But Sagittarius, look deeper. This is not punishment. It is redirection. It is the universe clearing away what no longer serves you, so you can step into the life you were always meant to live. Many of you have felt the call but silenced it out of fear. You told yourself it was impractical, irresponsible, selfish. You convinced yourself you weren't ready, that it was easier to endure the known than risk the unknown. But destiny is patient. It waits, yes, but it also insists. If ignored too long, it grows louder, until one day it breaks through in ways you can no longer avoid. And when that moment arrives, you will realize that the call was not here to destroy you. It was here to awaken the very essence of who you are. Sagittarius, you are the archer. You were born with an arrow meant to fly beyond the ordinary. The call of destiny is the moment when your hands can no longer hold that arrow back. Your soul trembles, your vision sharpens, and you know it is time to release. And though you cannot yet see where the arrow will land, you trust that the sky has space enough to hold it. Susan, whose marriage had grown empty, resisted her call for years. She convinced herself she could endure, that comfort was enough. But one day she heard her inner voice so clearly it startled her. If you do not leave now, you will never live. She told me later. It wasn't a choice anymore. It was life or death. Not of my body but of my spirit. That is what destiny feels like, Sagittarius. It is not a polite suggestion. It is a force that shakes you awake, demanding you claim your birthright. When the call of destiny arrives, you may feel torn between loyalty and truth. You may wonder if leaving means abandoning those you love. But Sagittarius, destiny is not selfish. When you follow your call, you create space for others to find their own. By stepping into your truth, you give silent permission for those around you to do the same. The mother who finally pursues her dreams teaches her children not to settle. The partner who chooses authenticity shows their loved ones the meaning of courage. The friend who moves abroad inspires others to believe in their own expansion. In this way, your destiny becomes a ripple that awakens the world around you. But answering the call does not erase fear. Fear will still whisper, telling you to stay where it's safe. Fear will insist that the unknown is too dangerous, too uncertain. And yet, Sagittarius, your soul already knows the truth. Safety without aliveness is not safety at all. It is suffocation. The unknown is frightening, yes, but it is also fertile. It is the place where your destiny can finally unfold. So how do you recognize the call of destiny? It comes as synchronicities, books falling into your hands, conversations that feel too timely to be coincidence, dreams that return night after night. It comes as longing, the persistent image of a different life, a different place, a different you. And most of all, it comes as a truth you can no longer deny. I cannot stay here any longer. Sagittarius, the call of destiny is not about abandoning your past. It is about carrying forward the wisdom of all you have endured and stepping into the next chapter with courage. It is about releasing the old roles that kept you small and embracing the vastness of who you were always meant to be. And so when you hear it, do not turn away. Do not silence it with excuses or drown it in busyness. Instead, pause. Place your hand over your heart. Ask yourself, what is calling me? Where am I being led? And then trust the answer, even if it terrifies you, even if it makes no sense, even if it demands more courage than you think you have. Because Sagittarius, destiny is not random. It is the map your soul wrote before you were born. And now that map is unfolding before you. This is your moment to listen, to answer, and to step forward into the life that is waiting. Gate for the crossing. Sagittarius, when the call of destiny grows too strong to ignore, you eventually reach a moment that changes everything. You cross the threshold. This is not a metaphorical shift alone. It is a lived experience, the moment when you say goodbye, pack your bags, leave the familiar, and step into the unknown. It is exhilarating and terrifying all at once, like standing on the edge of a cliff knowing that only by leaping will you discover your wings. The crossing is rarely graceful. It often comes with tears, doubt, and the ache of leaving behind what once felt safe. You may find yourself walking through an empty home for the last time, touching the walls as if they could hold your memories. You may drive away from a city where every street carries pieces of your past, whispering to yourself, "Am I really doing this?" You may sit in silence on the first night in a new place, staring at unfamiliar walls, wondering if you made a mistake. This is the wilderness of the crossing, the liminal space between who you were and who you are becoming. Consider Maria, a Sagittarius who left her long-time relationship after years of trying to make it work. On the first night alone in her new apartment, she sat on the floor surrounded by boxes and sobbed until her body shook. "I thought I had ruined my life," she told me later. The silence was unbearable. For the first time in decades, no one was waiting for me. I thought I would drown in loneliness. But she didn't. Day by day, she unpacked not just her belongings but her spirit. She decorated the space with colors that reflected her soul, played music she had long silenced, cooked meals just for herself. What once felt unbearable began to feel liberating. "I realized," she said, "that the silence wasn't empty. It was spacious. It was mine." Sagittarius, that is the paradox of the crossing. What first feels like loss reveals itself as freedom. The emptiness is not punishment. It is space being cleared so that your soul can breathe again. But in the early days you may not see it this way. You may feel disoriented, as if you no longer belong anywhere. You may long to return, to undo the decision, to choose comfort over courage. This is normal. Every soul crossing into new territory feels this ache. Think of a caterpillar dissolving into a cocoon. For a time it is neither what it was nor what it will become. In that in-between state, everything feels uncertain. Yet without that dissolution, the butterfly could never emerge. The crossing also tests your faith. People around you may question your choices. They may say, "Why would you leave something stable? Why risk so much? Isn't it safer to stay?" Their voices may echo the doubts already in your own mind. But Sagittarius, remember, safety without aliveness is a cage. Your path is not meant to be small, and you do not need everyone to understand. Destiny requires only your courage, not their approval. I recall a client named Robert, another Sagittarius, who left a corporate career at 55 to start a community arts program. His colleagues called him reckless. His family worried he was throwing away security. In the first year, he doubted himself constantly, struggling to make ends meet. But slowly the program flourished. Children who had no place to express themselves now painted, danced, and sang under his guidance. Years later he looked back and said, "The crossing was brutal, but it gave me back my soul. If I had stayed, I would have lived comfortably, but I would have died inside." That is the essence of the crossing, Sagittarius. Strips you bare. It asks you to face your fear of being alone, of failing, of being misunderstood. It removes the illusions of security and demands that you trust the invisible. In the beginning, you may feel like you've stepped into darkness. But if you stay with it, if you breathe through the silence, if you hold steady when no one else validates your choice, you will begin to notice something miraculous. The darkness is not empty. It is alive with possibility. It is the soil where your new life is germinating. During this phase, many Sagittarius souls report strange synchronicities. A book falls into your lap, offering precisely the wisdom you need. A stranger speaks words that echo the thoughts in your heart. Dreams become vivid, pointing you toward new directions. Numbers repeat, signs align. Doors you never expected begin to open. This is the universe's way of reassuring you. You are not lost. You are guided. But guidance does not erase the need for patience. The crossing is not a quick transition. It is a process. Some days you will feel strong, alive, brimming with possibility. Other days you may wake heavy, longing for the past. Both are part of the journey. Growth is not linear, Sagittarius. Healing comes in waves. Trust that even when you feel like you are moving backward, you are still being carried forward. And here lies another truth. The crossing transforms not only you but everyone connected to you. When you choose courage, you unconsciously invite others to examine their own lives. Maria's children, watching their mother rebuild her life, began to question the compromises they were making in their own relationships. Robert's colleagues, once skeptical, later admitted that his leap inspired them to dream beyond their routines. By crossing, you become a lighthouse, showing others that change, though difficult, is possible. So Sagittarius, if you find yourself in the crossing now, standing in the messy middle between endings and beginnings, I want you to know this. You are not failing. You are not lost. You are in the most sacred part of the journey. You are shedding what no longer fits so that you can grow into what has always been waiting. The road may feel steep, the nights may feel long, but every step forward is a declaration. I choose to live, not just exist. And one day, not far from now, you will look back on this threshold and see it for what it truly was. Not the end of your story, but the moment your story finally began. Conclusion. Coming home to destiny. Sagittarius, your journey has not been easy. You have felt the cracks, the restlessness, the whispers telling you that the place you once called home no longer fits. You have wrestled with fear, doubt, and the ache of leaving behind what was familiar. You have stood at the edge of the unknown and chosen to take the step anyway. That choice alone is proof of your courage. It is the mark of a soul willing to grow beyond its limitations and into its destiny. Leaving is never just about walking away from a place, a relationship, or a role. It is about walking toward yourself, toward the truth that you were never meant to live small. You are the seeker, the archer, the one whose fire lights new horizons. And even when the silence felt unbearable, even when the nights were heavy with questions, you did not give up. You are crossing into a life where your spirit can finally expand, where your gifts can flourish, where love no longer means sacrifice but alignment. So as you stand in this moment, remember this. You are not leaving to escape. You are leaving to come alive. This chapter is not about endings, but about the sacred beginning of a life that truly reflects your soul. If these words have spoken to you, if your heart feels lighter, stronger, or simply seen, I invite you to walk with me on this journey. Like this video if it resonates, share it with someone who may need its message, and subscribe so you never miss the guidance the stars are offering. Because Sagittarius, your destiny is calling, and together we are just beginning to answer.